The stale, recirculated air of the Fulton County Superior Court in Atlanta clung heavy and oppressive, a tangible cloak of anxiety and anticipation. It carried the faint, pervasive scent of disinfectant, old paper, and unspoken dread, a peculiar olfactory signature of justice. Rows of spectators, a mosaic of the curious, the professionally detached, and the deeply invested, filled the gallery benches, their collective murmurs a low, ceaseless hum beneath the cavernous ceiling. They leaned forward, eyes fixed on the central stage where a profound drama was about to unfold. The defendant's table, a vast, imposing slab of polished mahogany, seemed to swallow the figure standing beside it. He was young, impossibly so for the weight of the moment, yet he held himself with an erect posture, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his dark, impeccably clean, though slightly ill-fitting, suit trousers. His chin was held just so, a subtle elevation that signaled not defiance, but an unyielding inner resolve, a quiet refusal to bend. This was Marcus Thorne, barely 20 years old, formally accused of grand theft auto and reckless endangerment, charges that threatened to consume his nascent adulthood whole. The gravity of the accusations was undeniable, the stakes impossibly high. Yet, the way Judge Benedict Albright, a man whose silver hair and perfectly tailored robes exuded an aura of unshakable authority, looked at Marcus made it abundantly clear that the true trial, the one that truly mattered, transcended the mere letter of the law. Albright leaned back in his formidable high-backed chair, the worn leather creaking softly under his considerable weight. His fingers, adorned with a single, heavy signet ring, tapped a slow, rhythmic beat against the polished wood of his desk. He peered down at Marcus over the rim of his bifocals, his lips twisting into something that hovered between a practiced smirk and an outright sneer. "You believe you're a legal savant, Mr. Thorne?" His voice, a gravelly baritone, carried a dry, dismissive amusement that cut through the courtroom's hum. "This isn't a university debate hall, young man. This is a court of law, where genuine legal principles are applied, not theoretical arguments parried." A few brittle, dry chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The stone-faced bailiff, a woman whose stern expression rarely wavered, the perpetually typing stenographer, her fingers a blur over the keys, even District Attorney Evelyn Reed, the prosecutor, a woman whose designer suit and impeccable coiffure seemed to contain an inflated sense of superiority. They were all complicit in the silent joke, a collective assumption of authority, a conspiracy of predictable outcomes. Marcus Thorne, to them, was merely another cog in the grinding, unyielding machinery of justice, destined to be crushed into dust. Marcus didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, unwavering, meeting the judge's condescending eyes without a tremor. He wasn't laughing. How could he? He had spent years, an almost obsessive dedication, preparing for this very moment, though not in this specific capacity. He had never, not even in his wildest, most desperate imaginings, envisioned himself standing here, a defendant, on the precipice of losing everything. But he knew the courtroom's intricate dance, its unspoken rules, its hidden traps, its dramatic pauses, its carefully orchestrated performances, like the back of his own hand. While other kids his age were glued to screens, their minds consumed by the latest basketball stats or the intricate cheat codes of video games, he devoured dense, archaic case law. The labyrinthine pathways of legal precedent illuminated his solitary evenings, offering a stark contrast to the fleeting distractions of youth. While his friends gathered for boisterous, fleeting video game tournaments, he conducted elaborate, mock trials in his head, arguing imaginary cases against himself, dissecting hypothetical arguments, crafting rebuttals with painstaking precision in the quiet, almost sacred sanctity of his bedroom. His mother, Sophia Thorne, a woman whose hands were calloused not from physical labor but from decades of diligent, quiet work, had been a paralegal for over 25 years. She was a silent warrior in the bureaucratic trenches of the legal system, a witness to countless human dramas. Marcus had grown up listening to the myriad stories she brought home, hushed accounts of how prosecutors, driven by relentless caseloads and burning ambitions, sometimes cut corners, subtly bent rules, or conveniently, deliberately overlooked inconvenient facts that threatened their narratives. He'd heard how judges, cloaked in their robes of supposed impartiality, occasionally played favorites, their rulings subtly swayed by unspoken allegiances, by political expediency, or simply by the sheer, soul-crushing boredom of repetition. He learned how some defense attorneys, particularly the overworked and chronically underpaid public servants, barely tried, their weary resignation palpable even through his mother's second-hand, hushed accounts. He absorbed everything, every nuance, every bitter lesson, every subtle injustice. By the time he was 14, he could dissect a trial, spot the weaknesses, identify the unspoken pressures, and anticipate the maneuvers better than most fresh-faced law students drowning in stacks of textbooks. But none of that mattered to Albright, to Reed, to the collective cynicism that permeated every fiber of that courtroom. To them, Marcus was merely another young man of his background, another unfortunate statistic, another predictable outcome. "Let's make this quick," Mr. Thorne, the judge, sighed, a weary puff of impatience escaping his lips as he flipped open the case file, its contents already predetermined in his mind, its conclusion etched in stone. "I have a charity golf tournament at 4, and I prefer not to be delayed." The audience chuckled again, a ripple of sycophantic amusement, a subtle affirmation of the judge's perceived wit, but this time something fundamental shifted in the air. Marcus's lips, previously set in a neutral, impassive line, curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, a private, knowing smile that went entirely unnoticed by the judge, by the prosecutor, by anyone but himself. Because Albright, in his arrogant haste, had just made his first mistake, a fatal miscalculation in the grand, high-stakes game of legal chess. The courtroom, however, hadn't yet registered the subtle tremor that foreshadowed the coming earthquake. District Attorney Evelyn Reed, a woman who moved with the preordained confidence of someone who had already secured an unassailable victory, rose from her seat. Her designer suit, tailored to impeccable perfection, was crisp, its sharp lines mirroring her equally sharp, calculating gaze. Her silk scarf, a discreet splash of color, was perfectly draped, and her voice, rich and resonant, carried that rehearsed, practiced confidence of someone who had delivered the same triumphant speech 100 times before, its inflections perfected through countless repetitions. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice filling the cavernous space, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Marcus Thorne, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a sleek, black 2024 Porsche Cayenne, a luxury SUV reported missing from an upscale Buckhead residence just hours before his apprehension. Detective Sergeant Miles Corbin personally observed him fleeing a public parking garage in the stolen vehicle. Officers pursued him through the bustling downtown streets, a high-stakes, dangerous chase through evening traffic, where he allegedly attempted to evade apprehension, weaving recklessly through lanes, endangering innocent lives, before finally being boxed in near Centennial Olympic Park. His fingerprints, undeniable physical evidence, were found on the gearshift, and most damningly, Your Honor, Detective Sergeant Corbin's official report meticulously details his eyewitness account of the defendant behind the wheel immediately prior to the pursuit. The prosecution submits that the evidence speaks for itself, a mountain of undeniable facts that points squarely to the defendant's guilt. The words landed with weighty, undeniable finality, each syllable a calculated blow, precise and impactful. The crowd in the gallery shifted, a collective intake of breath, their hushed whispers escalating into a low, urgent hum of disbelief and condemnation. On the surface, it sounded damning, an open and shut case, an irrefutable narrative, a stolen luxury car, a reckless chase, a desperate attempt to flee, irrefutable fingerprints, and damning eyewitness testimony. Judge Albright glanced at Marcus over the rim of his bifocals, a fleeting look that seemed to say, "Don't bother," then turned back to Reed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Proceed, counselor." The prosecutor, buoyed by the judge's implicit endorsement, walked toward the jury box, her polished heels clicking rhythmically against the cool marble floor, the sound echoing slightly in the vastness of the room. She radiated an almost palpable smugness, an aura of assured triumph. "The defense," Reed began, her voice dripping with condescension, her tone dripping with disdain, "may try to convince you that this was all a misunderstanding, a regrettable confluence of unfortunate events, that Mr. Thorne is some innocent, unfortunate victim of circumstance, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time." She turned then, her eyes, cold and unwavering, locking onto Marcus's for the first time. "But let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost mocking tone, "what kind of victim flees from the police, weaving through traffic, endangering innocent lives, if they have nothing to hide?" The tension in the room thickened, stretching taut like a bowstring about to snap, the air growing heavy with anticipation. Judge Albright leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, a silent signal of his engagement, his implicit agreement with Reed's rhetorical flourish. Marcus didn't blink, his gaze meeting Reed's without flinching, his expression a mask of impassive calm, unreadable to the casual observer. Reed, emboldened, continued, flipping through a stack of papers with a practiced flourish, her arguments seemingly unassailable. Your Honor, I have here the official report of Detective Sergeant Miles Corbin, meticulously detailing his eyewitness account. This report, filed immediately after the incident, states unequivocally that Detective Sergeant Corbin personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle, operating it erratically, immediately prior to his attempt to flee. Furthermore, as I mentioned, the fingerprints found on the gearshift are an undeniable match to the defendant. The vehicle was confirmed stolen within minutes of the report. The arrest was made by the book, following every protocol. Albright exhaled through his nose, a soft, almost imperceptible sound of satisfaction, nodding slowly. Sounds straightforward to me, Counselor. A clear-cut case. And for most people in the room, from the bewildered jurors to the murmuring gallery, it probably did. The prosecution's narrative was seamless, logical, seemingly irrefutable. A stolen car, a reckless chase, a textbook arrest, direct evidence. But Marcus, with his years of solitary study, his deep immersion in the minutiae of legal procedure, had learned to see beyond the surface, to identify the subtle cracks, the minute imperfections, and even the most polished facades. Still, he stayed silent, a silent sentinel, watching, waiting for his precise moment to strike. Judge Albright tapped his gavel lightly, the sharp click echoing in the suddenly heavy air. All right, Counselor Petrova, let's hear the defense's response. He turned to Marcus's lawyer, Lena Petrova, a public defender whose weary shoulders and tired eyes spoke volumes about the relentless grind of her profession, the endless fight against an unforgiving system. Lena, who had barely said 3 words since stepping into the courtroom, now stood up, shifting nervously from foot to foot, her voice a hesitant murmur. Your Honor, my client. Marcus, with a subtle but firm movement, placed a hand on her arm, a silent request, a quiet assertion of control. Lena hesitated, her eyes wide with surprise, then slowly, reluctantly, sank back into her seat. And for the first time, Marcus spoke, his voice cutting through the lingering tension, clear, resonant, utterly self-possessed, carrying an undeniable gravitas. I'll be representing myself, Your Honor. The room went completely silent. The collective breath of the courtroom seemed to catch in its throat. Albright stared at him, his amusement palpable, almost contemptuous, but now tinged with a flicker of genuine shock. You'll what, Mr. Thorne? He drawled, his voice dripping with incredulity. Marcus's voice remained calm, steady, unwavering. I'll be defending myself, Your Honor. I believe I am adequately prepared to do so. A wave of murmurs, louder this time, spread through the courtroom, a ripple of shock, disbelief, and a touch of nervous excitement. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up, a rare crack in his stoic facade. Reed's arrogant smirk faltered, her perfectly sculpted composure momentarily breaking, before she let out a sharp, derisive laugh, more a nervous bark than genuine amusement. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is preposterous. The defendant is a minor. He has no legal training. This is a mockery of justice. Marcus's voice, though not raised, cut through Reed's objection with quiet authority. Your Honor, I am 20 years old. I am legally an adult. And while I may not possess a law degree, I have spent years meticulously studying the intricacies of our legal system, the nuances of procedure, the precedents of case law. I am ready to proceed. Albright, regaining his composure, albeit with a visible effort, fixed Marcus with a cold, assessing stare. Mr. Thorne, this is not a game, nor is it a theatrical performance. A public defender is provided for a very serious reason, to ensure fair representation in complex legal matters. And I am profoundly grateful for Counselor Petrova's diligent work and dedication, Your Honor, Marcus responded, his tone respectful, yet unyieldingly firm. But I believe certain granular aspects of this particular case, the minute details of the evidence, require a unique perspective and a level of precise detail that only I possess. With all due respect to Counselor Petrova, I must represent myself to ensure every stone is turned, every inconsistency addressed. Albright's gaze flickered between Marcus and Lena Petrova, who could only offer a helpless shrug, her eyes conveying a mix of surprise and grudging respect for Marcus's conviction. The judge sighed, a long, exasperated sound, a weary acceptance of the inevitable. Very well, Mr. Thorne. You are an adult, and you possess the constitutional right to represent yourself. But understand this, and understand it clearly. I will not tolerate any theatrics. This is a legitimate court of law, Mr. Thorne, not a platform for personal grandstanding or frivolous delays. Proceed. This certainly will be interesting, Reed muttered again, her voice still laced with a lingering, brittle amusement, though a tiny, insidious seed of unease had been planted firmly in her mind. But no one else in the courtroom was laughing when Marcus took his first deliberate step forward, moving from the defendant's side of the table towards the very center of the courtroom, directly facing the jury. Because, in that very moment, with that single, resolute step, everything was about to irrevocably change. The palpable weight of the courtroom settled around Marcus as he adjusted his stance, his hands still casually in his pockets, a posture that radiated an unsettling, almost unnerving calm. He let the silence stretch for a moment, drawing it out, prolonging the anticipation, enough to make them, the judge, the prosecutor, the jury, acutely uncomfortable, to subtly shift the inherent power dynamic within the room. Then, finally, his voice, clear and resonant, sliced through the heavy, expectant air. Your Honor, before I commence with my opening statement, I'd like to clarify a foundational point with the prosecution. District Attorney Reed, her irritation now palpable, raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms over her chest. Proceed, Mr. Thorne. But let's keep it concise. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step forward, his gaze fixed directly on Reed, unwavering. District Attorney Reed, you stated, and the state's official report claims that Detective Sergeant Miles Corbin personally observed me fleeing a public parking garage in the stolen vehicle immediately prior to my arrest, correct? Reed exhaled sharply, a sound of dismissive boredom, though a faint hint of defensiveness now laced her tone. That is precisely correct, Mr. Thorne. And that eyewitness testimony is explicitly detailed in Detective Sergeant Corbin's official report, signed and witnessed, a crucial piece of our evidence. Of course, it is, Marcus nodded slowly, his voice smooth, devoid of any discernible sarcasm. Then, with a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his posture, he turned his full attention to Judge Albright, his eyes meeting the judge's hardened gaze. Your Honor, I move to dismiss that specific testimony as evidence. Albright squinted at him, a sudden, genuine spark of bewilderment flickering in his eyes. On what grounds, Mr. Thorne? That is a very serious motion. Eyewitness testimony from a police officer is usually given significant weight. Marcus pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time, his movements deliberate, unhurried, and gestured toward the prosecution's table. Because, Your Honor, Detective Sergeant Corbin never saw me in that car. In fact, his official report explicitly states that his body camera was activated during the pursuit, not before the alleged sighting. Furthermore, I have obtained records from the Atlanta Police Department's Digital Evidence Management System, which indicate that the crucial first 7 minutes of Detective Sergeant Corbin's body camera footage from that specific night are mysteriously either corrupted or entirely missing from the official digital archive. These are the minutes during which he claims to have observed me. It's not just a time/location discrepancy, Your Honor. It's an absolute absence of the claimed visual evidence where it should undeniably exist. A palpable flicker of genuine, unfeigned confusion, quickly morphing into anger, crossed Reed's face. Her carefully constructed facade momentarily crumbled. What are you implying, Mr. Thorne? This is an outrageous accusation. The report is what stands. Marcus took another step forward, his voice gaining a quiet but undeniable authority, his tone unwavering. Your Honor, if the court allows me, I'd like to submit a formal request to verify the complete, unedited digital chain of custody for Detective Sergeant Corbin's body camera footage from that night. I'd like to see the original, uncorrupted files, and the logs detailing any access, alteration, or deletion of that specific footage. If the detective witnessed me as claimed, the footage should exist and be intact from the moment of observation. But he let the word hang in the air, weighted with the unspoken accusation of tampering or deliberate omission. I have a very strong feeling it won't. Now, the murmurs in the gallery erupted into audible gasps and astonished exclamations. The jury members, previously looking bored or passively observing, sat up straighter, their eyes wide with dawning realization. Albright frowned, his stern gaze shifting from Marcus to Reed, a silent, demanding question hanging between them. District Attorney Reed cleared her throat, a dry, uncomfortable sound, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, this is an attempt to derail the proceedings. The integrity of Detective Sergeant Corbin is beyond reproach. Are we truly going to take the unsubstantiated word of a defendant accused of grand theft auto, no less, over a decorated, professional law enforcement officer and his official, signed documentation? Her voice was regaining some of its bluster, trying to reassert control, but the tremor was undeniable. Marcus gave a small, almost casual shrug. a gesture of supreme confidence that belied his age. Your Honor, if the detective's claim is true, then the complete, uncorrupted body camera data will unequivocally prove it. It's a simple matter of digital forensics and transparency. But if it isn't complete, if crucial segments are missing or corrupted, then the detective's testimony becomes, at best, unreliable, and at worst, a deliberate fabrication to fit a narrative. That, Your Honor, goes to the very heart of this case. Albright studied Marcus for a long, uncomfortable moment, his eyes narrowed, his initial amusement now entirely replaced by a palpable sense of discomfort and growing irritation. The gravity of Marcus's claim, backed by technical details like digital integrity and missing files, was impossible to dismiss out of hand. Then he turned to Reed, his voice clipped, demanding an answer. District Attorney Reed, does the prosecution have any issue with providing the complete, unedited digital chain of custody records for Detective Sergeant Corbin's body camera footage, as Mr. Thorne requests? Reed hesitated. The pause was agonizingly long, pregnant with implication. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. And most importantly, the judge noticed, his expression tightening with a visible ripple of professional irritation. Marcus took a quiet, measured breath. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, their tactics, their bluffs, the way they played the system, cutting corners and relying on assumptions that the defense wouldn't have the means or the acumen to challenge. And there was one thing he knew without a doubt, a cardinal rule of the courtroom. If a prosecutor was genuinely confident in her case, if her evidence was truly unassailable, she would never, ever stall when challenged to verify its very existence and integrity. Albright sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of exasperation, pinching the bridge of his nose. District Attorney Reed, he prompted again, his voice sharper now, demanding an immediate, unambiguous answer. Reed finally shook her head, a reluctant, almost imperceptible movement, her face a mask of barely suppressed fury. No objections, Your Honor. The records will be made available. But the shift had already begun. The tectonic plates of the courtroom's dynamic had begun to move, grinding inexorably. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was silent, a profound, heavy silence, but the tension, thick and palpable, was loud, thrumming like an overloaded electrical current. The tide had turned, and everyone in the room felt it with a chilling clarity. District Attorney Reed, her face now a faint shade of crimson, shuffled her papers with a nervous rustle, her polished confidence visibly cracking around the edges. She cleared her throat, a dry, uncomfortable sound, attempting desperately to regain her composure, to pivot to her next, supposedly unassailable piece of evidence. Your Honor, while we await the verification of the body camera records, a mere procedural delay, I assure the court, a minor administrative hiccup. The undeniable fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were unequivocally found on the gearshift of the stolen vehicle. That, Your Honor, is physical evidence, undeniable and direct, placing him physically within the vehicle. Marcus gave a small nod, his face unreadable, his gaze unwavering as he met Reed's. That's true, District Attorney Reed. My fingerprints were indeed found on the gearshift. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, shifting his focus to the jury, his movements controlled, his confidence unwavering. But let's talk about that evidence for a second, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Albright raised an eyebrow, a flicker of intrigued caution in his eyes, gesturing for Marcus to continue. Marcus turned to the jury, his voice calm, clear, and utterly reasonable, making direct eye contact with each one of them, connecting with them on a personal, relatable level. The prosecution wants you to believe that simply finding my fingerprints on a gearshift in a car means I stole it. That's the simple, compelling story they're selling you, designed to lead you to a single, predetermined conclusion of guilt. But let's think about this logically, with common sense, with a little real-world experience. He took a deep, measured breath, his tone staying calm, controlled, as if explaining a complex, yet fundamental, puzzle to a group of eager students. Imagine, if you will, you're walking through a busy public parking lot, perhaps outside a shopping mall or a sports arena. You pass by a parked car. Maybe it's a very nice car, a luxury SUV, like this Porsche Cayenne. And for some reason, perhaps the window is left down, perhaps the door is unlocked, perhaps you just glance inside, you instinctively, even subconsciously, lean against it, or perhaps briefly touch the gear shift or the steering wheel, out of idle curiosity or just as a casual gesture. It's a common surface in a public space. Would that brief, innocuous contact automatically mean you stole it? Would that, alone, Make you a car thief? A few jurors exchanged uneasy glances, a ripple of unease, a murmur of dawning understanding, passing through them as the common-sense analogy hit home with unexpected force. Someone in the gallery muttered something under their breath, a low sound of belated comprehension. Marcus didn't give them time to recover, to process the implications of his simple, yet devastating, hypothetical. Now, let's apply that logic to this case. The vehicle in question, this stolen 2024 Porsche Cayenne, was indeed found abandoned in a public parking lot near Centennial Olympic Park, a high-traffic tourist area, hours after it was allegedly stolen. I was in that vicinity, walking home after attending a study group at the public library, a fact corroborated by library records and my friend's statements, which I have here and will submit if necessary. And yes, when I walked past the car, which was parked directly next to a pedestrian walkway, I admit, I instinctively glanced inside. The driver's side window was fully down, and the door was ajar. Out of a dumb moment of curiosity, perhaps even a brief moment of being mesmerized by its interior, I leaned into the opening and my hand brushed against the gear shift, just for a second. I didn't think much of it. I certainly didn't take the car. I didn't drive it anywhere. I didn't steal anything from inside. It was just a fleeting, thoughtless moment of human curiosity, no more, no less. He let that sit for a heavy second, allowing the vivid image to form in their minds, a scene of innocent curiosity rather than criminal intent. Then, in a voice that cut through the silence like a scalpel, precise and utterly devastating, he asked, "Does touching a common surface in an unlocked car, in a public place, out of casual curiosity, automatically make you a criminal?" Ladies and gentlemen of the jury? District Attorney Reed cleared her throat, a desperate, raspy sound, flipping frantically through her notes, searching for something, anything, to regain control of the crumbling narrative. Her face was now a deeper shade of crimson, a stark contrast to her pristine white blouse. Marcus wasn't finished. And while we're on the topic of forensic evidence, I must question the thoroughness of its presentation. He turned his penetrating gaze to Albright. "Your Honor, was the forensic specialist from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the individual who personally processed and analyzed the alleged fingerprints from this case, subpoenaed to testify today?" Albright blinked, caught completely off guard by the unexpected, yet perfectly legitimate question. He glanced at Reed, his expression demanding an explanation. The prosecutor hesitated, a long, agonizing pause that spoke volumes, then reluctantly, her voice barely a whisper, she managed, "No, Your Honor. The forensic report was submitted as sufficient documentation. It's a standard practice." Marcus's lips pressed together, a tight, thin line. "So let me get this straight, District Attorney Reed," he said, his voice laced not with anger, but with cold, surgical logic, every word a deliberate strike. "The state is using forensic evidence, supposedly crucial to trying and convicting me of a felony, a crime with severe implications for my future, but they didn't think it was necessary or important to bring in the actual specialist. The expert who processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine that specialist? No opportunity to ask about the chain of custody of the evidence, about potential contamination in a public parking lot, about the specific methodologies used in their analysis, or to challenge the accuracy or integrity of the analysis itself. Just a report, presented as gospel, with no opportunity for scrutiny." Reed's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping involuntarily in her cheek. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom, realizing the precariousness of her position. Marcus simply nodded, like that was all he needed to hear, the damning silence confirming his unspoken accusation of procedural sloppiness, if not outright evasion. "Interesting." Judge Albright sighed, a deep, exasperated sound, pinching the bridge of his nose between his thumb and forefinger. It was the weary look of a man who was finally realizing, with a sinking sensation, that this case, which he had so casually dismissed as an easy win, a routine formality, was anything but. The foundations of the prosecution's case were crumbling, not under the weight of dramatic, shouting revelations, but under the precise, relentless pressure of logic, common sense, and meticulous procedural integrity. But Marcus wasn't done yet, because the next thing he was about to say, the next piece of suppressed or conveniently overlooked truth he was about to reveal, would change everything, not just for him, but for the very perception of justice within that courtroom. Marcus took another slow, deliberate step forward, his voice steady but firm, resonating with a quiet authority that belied his years, his gaze sweeping over the jury. "Your Honor, before I proceed with my closing arguments, I'd like to enter into evidence a crucial document, a copy of the initial police report filed by the owner of the vehicle, Mr. Jeremy Caldwell, on the night his car was reported stolen. Judge Albright frowned, his brow furrowed in a deep V. The initial report, Mr. Thorne? I was not aware of any discrepancies between the initial report and the one submitted by the prosecution in discovery. His gaze immediately snapped to Reed, a silent, furious question in his eyes, demanding an explanation for yet another potential omission. Marcus nodded, his expression unwavering. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Jeremy Caldwell, the registered owner of the alleged stolen Porsche Cayenne, provided a detailed initial statement to the Atlanta Police Department. A statement that, for some inexplicable reason, was never fully submitted in the prosecution's official filings, nor was it ever fully provided to my public defender before today. And I think, he paused, his gaze fixed squarely on Reed. I know precisely why. He turned to Reed. District Attorney Reed, do you recall what specific, unique items Mr. Caldwell explicitly reported as missing from his vehicle in his initial police report on the night it was allegedly stolen? Reed's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping furiously in her cheek. She knew exactly what was coming. The color visibly drained from her face as the trap, meticulously set by Marcus, sprung shut around her. She swallowed hard, unable to meet Marcus's unwavering gaze, unable to form a coherent response. Marcus didn't wait for her to answer. Instead, he pulled out a crisp, printed transcript from his file, its pages clean and uncreased, a stark contrast to Reed's now visibly disheveled notes. He held it up, a silent, damning testament, and began to read aloud, his voice clear and resonant, filling the suddenly hushed courtroom with undeniable facts. I left my unique, custom-made silver golf clubs, with my initials JC engraved, in the trunk, along with my very distinct, limited edition Italian leather briefcases that contained sensitive client documents. They were gone when I returned to the car. Marcus paused, then continued, Your Honor, I have here the arrest report of the vehicle Detective Sergeant Corbin claims I was driving. This report, filed by the arresting officers, explicitly states that when the vehicle was recovered, these unique, custom-made silver golf clubs and very distinct, limited edition Italian leather briefcases were still present in the trunk. They were photographed and inventoried. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the courtroom, a wave of stunned, absolute realization washing over the gallery, the jury, and even the impassive bailiff. Marcus held the paper up, a stark, irrefutable piece of evidence directly contradicting the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative. That, Your Honor, is a direct quote from the original police report of the incident, taken from the owner himself on the night of the alleged theft. And the arrest report for the vehicle I was supposedly driving shows these items were still in the car. The prosecution chose to ignore this critical, fundamental discrepancy. They suppressed this vital information. And yet, Marcus turned back to Judge Albright, his voice rising slightly, imbued with righteous indignation, his composure now radiating unyielding conviction, despite this clear, undeniable proof that the vehicle I was allegedly apprehended in was not the one reported stolen, or at least, not the one described in the initial report. They want this jury, an impartial body of citizens, to believe that I am guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, based on questionable testimony and circumstantial fingerprints. Reed stepped forward, scrambling, her earlier composure completely shattered. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of a stolen vehicle, she blustered, trying desperately to shout over the growing murmurs, to regain any semblance of control. But Marcus shook his head, a calm, resolute gesture that amplified his quiet power. No, District Attorney Reed. I wasn't. And that is precisely the point. His voice didn't rise, didn't shout, but it cut through the courtroom with sharp, incisive precision, slicing through Reed's desperate bluster. I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was actually abandoned, walking home after leaving my study group. I was not in the car when it was found. I was not even near the car. I was not running from anything. The only thing tying me to this case, Your Honor, is what appears to be incredibly sloppy police work, a rush to judgment, and assumptions made based on convenience, rather than on diligent investigation. The very vehicle they claim I stole, based on the owner's own description, was not the vehicle I was found near, if those specific, unique items were still in it. This suggests either a faulty initial report, or more likely, that the real stolen vehicle was a different one, or that the police apprehended the wrong person entirely. Judge Albright let out a slow, deliberate breath, rubbing his temple with a visible tremor. The case was unraveling not just fast, but spectacularly, catastrophically fast, publicly exposing glaring holes. And everyone in the courtroom, from the wide-eyed jurors to the stunned spectators, knew it. The very foundation of the prosecution's narrative, built on seemingly solid ground, had been exposed as a house of cards, collapsing under the weight of suppressed facts and contradictory evidence. Marcus turned back to the jury, his final words hanging heavy in the charged air, imbued with the weight of truth. The real suspect, who took Mr. Caldwell's Porsche with his golf clubs and briefcases, got away that night. He's still out there. The officers, perhaps under pressure to close a high-profile case, perhaps in a hurry, perhaps simply because it was easier, found a young man of my description in the same general area and decided that was close enough, or that the exact vehicle details didn't matter. That's what this case is really about, ladies and gentlemen. A shortcut, a severe lack of thoroughness, a deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence, and a fundamental failure to seek the truth. And in a system that proudly claims to deliver justice, that, I submit, is simply unacceptable. Silence. A profound, echoing silence settled over the courtroom, broken only by the rapid scribbling of the stenographer's machine. Albright cleared his throat, a dry, uncomfortable sound, and adjusted his bifocals, his gaze fixed, unblinking, on District Attorney Reed. District Attorney Reed, he said, his voice now flat, devoid of any previous amusement or disdain, replaced by a steely professional anger. Does the prosecution have anything further to present to this court? Reed stood stiffly, her face flushed with a mortifying crimson, her shoulders slumped in defeat, her entire demeanor broadcasting utter capitulation. She could only manage a choked, barely audible, "No, Your Honor." Judge Albright exhaled, a long, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of countless past injustices. He looked at Marcus for a long, searching moment, his expression complex, unreadable, filled with a mixture of profound disbelief, grudging respect, and perhaps a flicker of deep-seated shame or regret for his initial dismissiveness. Then he glanced at the jury, his gaze sweeping over their faces, seeing the clear, undeniable shift in their expressions, the dawning understanding, the collective shock that mirrored his own. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice resonating with a new, somber authority, and spoke the words that would stay with everyone in that room, words that would reverberate through the legal corridors of Fulton County for years to come. Case dismissed due to insufficient evidence and prosecutorial misconduct. A beat of stunned, absolute silence. Then, a sudden, explosive chaos erupted. Half the courtroom burst into a cacophony of sound, some in disbelief, their jaws slack, others in quiet, profound relief, tears streaming down their faces. The gallery stirred, a wave of agitated murmurs, as reporters scrambled, furiously scribbling in their notebooks, their pens scratching loudly against paper. Camera flashes began to pop in the distance, a furious flurry of eager photographers preparing to capture the indelible moment. Marcus didn't move right away. He stood there, allowing the moment to settle, letting the monumental reality of the dismissal, the vindication, sink in for everyone present. Judge Albright, still gripping his gavel, looked at Marcus with that unreadable expression, something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Raw, unvarnished recognition, perhaps even a pang of deep regret for his initial, dismissive arrogance. Marcus met his gaze, a silent, knowing acknowledgement passing between them, then turned to leave, his steps firm, purposeful, resolute. But just as he reached the heavy oak doors, the judge's voice, surprisingly soft yet clear, stopped him. "Mr. Thorne." Marcus stopped, his hand on the cold brass handle, but he didn't turn back immediately. He listened, his posture still. Albright hesitated, a brief, loaded pause, then finally said, his voice tinged with a clear, undeniable grudging admiration, "You should consider law school, Mr. Thorne. Very seriously consider it. You possess a rare talent." Marcus's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smirk. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. His path had just been irrevocably, profoundly set. Outside the courthouse, the crisp Atlanta air was thick with voices, a roaring cacophony of sound, a media frenzy. Reporters swarmed the wide marble steps, a frantic, hungry mob, their cameras flashing like a relentless storm of lightning, microphones thrust forward like weapons, eager for a soundbite, a definitive reaction, a triumphant quote. "Marcus, did you anticipate the judge would dismiss the case? What are your plans now, Mr. Thorne, after this stunning victory? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor in your very first, self-represented trial?" Marcus pulled his hoodie, which he'd changed into, over his head, effectively shielding himself from the barrage of questions, the blinding lights, the desperate clamor for his attention. He wasn't interested in the spectacle, the fleeting, ephemeral fame of the moment. This wasn't about proving how smart he was, how clever he could be in a courtroom, but that satisfaction was undeniable. It was about something far, far bigger, something deeply ingrained in his very being, instilled by years of observation. His mother, Sophia, was waiting for him at the very bottom of the steps, standing a little apart from the swirling media circus, a silent, unwavering beacon. Her arms were crossed, her face a mask of unreadable emotion, a complex mix of relief, exhaustion, and overwhelming pride. For a long, silent moment, she just looked at him, her eyes searching his, filled with a mixture of profound relief, sheer terror he'd put her through, and an immense, almost unbearable pride. Then, finally, she shook her head, a slow, gentle movement, and let out a long, shuddering breath, as if a lifetime of worry had just been released. "Boy, you scared me half to death, Marcus Thorne," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, a fragile blend of laughter and tears. Marcus chuckled softly, scratching the back of his head. "Had to take a risk, Ma. It was the only way to expose the truth." She stared at him for another second, her eyes still glistening, then pulled him into a tight, fierce hug, holding him close as if she could physically protect him from the entire world, from all its injustices. "You always were the stubborn one," she murmured into his shoulder, a soft laugh catching in her throat, a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. The cameras kept flashing, a relentless, blinding storm of artificial light, but Marcus wasn't paying attention to them anymore. His focus was solely on the warmth of his mother's embrace, the quiet, immense strength of her presence, the anchor in his turbulent world. Across the street, standing discreetly by his black sedan, Judge Benedict Albright watched. His posture was distinctly different now. The rigid arrogance, the dismissive amusement, had vanished, replaced by a subtle slump of his shoulders, a quiet, almost contemplative weariness. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something deeper, something closer to profound reflection, a reckoning with a system he had long presided over. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine, just another day, another young defendant, another predictable guilty plea, a quick formality before his golf game. But now he knew he'd remember this one, vividly, for the rest of his career. He'd remember Marcus Thorne, because Marcus had done something most people never could. He hadn't just won his case. He had made the system, in that small but profoundly significant moment, look at itself, truly look at its flaws, its biases, its shortcuts, its potential for injustice. And for once, it had blinked first, forced to acknowledge a truth it might rather have ignored. Here's the enduring lesson we should all learn from Marcus Thorne's quiet, yet utterly devastating, triumph. How many other cases had gone this way? How many other innocent or marginally guilty people, lacking Marcus's intellect, his self-taught legal acumen, his fierce determination, or simply the sheer audacity to challenge the Leviathan of the state, had been convicted, not because of irrefutable, untainted evidence, but because of systemic bias, overworked public defenders, convenient shortcuts, a deliberate suppression of exculpatory information, and a justice system that sometimes cared more about closing cases, maintaining conviction rates, and preserving its flawless record than about diligently, painstakingly finding the absolute, unvarnished truth. Marcus had the innate intelligence, the self-taught knowledge, and the stubborn, unyielding courage to fight back, to unravel the intricate fabric of the prosecution's claims piece by painstaking piece, exposing every loose thread, every hidden knot. But what about the ones who didn't? What about the countless others who stood in that exact spot, facing similar overwhelming odds, but lacked the resources, the specific knowledge, or the sheer, incredible audacity to challenge the seemingly unchallengeable establishment? This wasn't just about one case, not just about Marcus's personal vindication, though that was a powerful, emotional core. It was about all of them, the silent, countless injustices that accumulate, building up, unseen, unheard, eroding faith in the very principles of fairness and impartiality. He knew what he had to do next. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in. But next time, when he stepped inside, when he approached that same imposing defendant's table, he wouldn't be the defendant, fighting for his own freedom, his own future. He'd be the attorney, a relentless advocate for the voiceless, a champion for those ensnared by the very system he had just outsmarted, a force for systemic change. And when that day came, when he stood there as a lawyer, he wouldn't be the only one pushing for change, but he would be one of its most potent symbols. If this story made you think, even for a second, If it sparked a flicker of doubt, a surge of hope, or a burning desire for justice, then please, share it. The justice system is built on laws, yes, but it is run by people. And people can change, but only if we make them. If Marcus Thorne's story resonates with you, let it inspire. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and let's keep this vital conversation going, beyond the confines of this single courtroom, into the wider world, demanding true justice for all.